Hello, and welcome to Scalawags, episode number 35. Man, it's taken us this long to get to 35. We're like a bunch of slackers or something.
Coincidentally, all of us are 35.
What are you talking about? I'm 21. I only had my birthday last week. I'm legal to drink now.
Oh, man.
So we're down Daniel. We're missing Daniel, our cabin boy. Yar. And Heather will be joining us in about 10 minutes or so, I think.
Yeah.
Until then, it's just us.
So,
and
the you guys are
title,
gonna have to deal.
I missed the title. The title is What's in a Standard Anyway for this one.
Yeah, but first we should cover a little bit of news, maybe.
Yeah. Hit the news, Josh. What's been happening?
Well, yeah. So first of all, Scala Days has announced its locations, and they are both good locations. They are both locations we have been to before. However, this year we heard there's a new format. Scala Days has been announced for New York City, but the entire city.
Yeah, it's taken over the whole island of Manhattan because there's no other location, right? So it's the whole island of Manhattan is how I read it.
Yeah, we were speculating that pretty much everyone from Scala Days is going to kind of start in, Times Square and then sort of hover around different areas, talking about different things throughout New York City, and try to convert people to Scala. It's going to be a whole evangelical Scala conference.
We can put like one person on top of each building, and then we can shout at each other.
Oh, dude, I want to be crazy cat lady walking around like with loads of cats saying the end of the world is nigh and use Scala.
We're going to bring a giant cloud machine and project the presentations into the sky. That's
it'll be happening somewhere in New York. That's what we know so far. We don't know more specifics than that. And also Berlin.
Yeah. So there'll be one in New York and one in Berlin. Do you guys know what the dates are for those? I think the dates are announced, right?
Yep, they were.
It's like May.
Yeah, one of them was May.
June.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a lot closer than before, I think, May and June, as opposed to spring and summer. So that's kind of cool. But get your talks in.
Oh yeah. I think I'm probably gonna hit the New York one and probably gonna skip the Berlin one just because it's a heck of a long way from here to the other one. But I don't know what you guys are thinking. Are you gonna try and make both?
Well, I'm required to, I think.
Oh, yeah. That's different. It's your job.
Yeah, I think I might do the Berlin one because there are Suereths in Germany that I have never met.
Excellent.
We've never actually connected the two parts of the family back after World War II, so it'd be nice to say hi. Yeah.
That's cool. I did love Berlin. I'd like to go to both. It's just, I'm self-employed and all that malarkey. It's all time out, so...
Yeah.
Does the Google Toolbox have like a hat with a feather you can put on and
a dandy hat?
Yeah, a dandy hat. Yes. I don't know. I could look for it, but I do have this. I do have this. You guys remember that episode?
I do. It's almost as good as the bear that attacked Daniel. Seth, that was the best bit of photoshopping I've seen in ages. That was so awesome.
Thank you.
That was so excellent. Right, so that's the Scala Days CFP. Any other news?
Well, there's a whole bunch of other interesting things happening, I would say, but nothing like. We should probably jump into the topic so we don't lose out on it. Yeah.
It's a big topic.
Yeah.
It's a big topic. So,
yeah, I mean. So I think there's two parts to the topic we wanted to talk about. One was specifically about a collections redesign. I wanted to talk about the iterators versus parallel folds. But first, I think more pressing would be what happened on Twitter and the discussion that started there and kind of ebbed everywhere about like what should the standard library be? What should the slips cover? That sort of thing. Like, what is it that we want out of Scala Standard Library?
Yeah, and that's a tough one. So, at least from my perspective, the idea behind the slips was really one to try and get collaboration going. There's a lot of people out. There's a lot of good, very good Scala developers out there, library developers out there, and trying to get them to talk to one another and actually work together to improve the libraries was sort of the aim of that thing. And somehow I became very obsessed with what's going in and what isn't, and the standards and that sort of thing. And maybe it's time to my take after burning lots of cycles on this is maybe it's time to take a bit of a step back and try and figure out what an organization like that would look like if it was all about developer collaboration and improving a standard, standard's the wrong word, improving a high quality set of libraries that people know how to go and find. And then from there, selecting distributions with batteries included, as they put it. So that was sort of where I'd got to in the whole thinking process. I don't know if it could work or not. I never know if these things can work or not, but that was sort of an idea.
I think that makes sense for like the SLIP committee, but like the standard library right now, when you think of standard libraries and languages, this is what your beginners experience. This is your beginner experience. The quality of the standard library is usually used as the quality of the language when you're learning. So when you learn Ruby, right, you look at the standard library of Ruby and its module system. Actually, that is kind of tied in there. And the quality of things that you start with, and you know the documentation for it, and that's how you evaluate the language, because inextricably, like the way that you write code and all the intro tutorials just uses the standard library because it comes by default. So there is something about like the standard and the default way of doing things that I think is important. That's the way that people who learn the language come and learn that style, the way that you write the library. Java, as we all know, had a very huge standard library that I would say is a little stagnant, but they are constantly adding in new little components here and there. So it's now bloated. So you have areas of it that are just terrible that you know not to use, and you have areas of it that are nice, and you have areas of it that aren't good. But that standard library is how people come into the language and like do things the first time. Like in college, you just look at the Java doc for the standard library, and that's where you come in. So there's that aspect to a standard library that I think is kind of important. It kind of shapes the viewpoint of people coming into the language and what they think is acceptable.
So hold that thought, and I hate to be a tangent thrower, but we have a procedural question. Apparently Seth is the one that the focus is on right now all the time.
Oh,
and
that's because I clicked a button.
There we go. That should now be. It should now be the talker. The first thing I saw was, why is Seth always so large? And I'm like, he looks about the same size as normal to me. I'm trying to think how he could be that large, but it's apparently.
So it's 10 minutes of me like looking out the window at the people across the street who are like doing things with axes and jumping up on their pickup truck.
Well, that sounds like it's we should actually just throw that on the podcast. But the reason why is in the beginning Seth said, "Hey, do you like the new scenery?" So I like clicked on his picture so I could see him instead of myself.
So anyway, Josh, I apologize. I derailed you there, but.
Oh no! That's thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, and just so people know, we actually have live Q&A questions. So if you want to join in the discussion, please do, because I think there's a lot of community angst around this topic as well.
Yeah, well,
it would be nice to air out everything, but
I think
anyway.
Perhaps if you weren't, I think if you look at triggering events, and if you weren't aware of it last week, basically what happened was a proposal came in for adding JSON, a JSON abstract syntax tree to the standard library, and I think really what it did was touched off a lot of tension that's been building up for a lot of time over what should and shouldn't be in, and this just became the lightning rod for that. But it became a very animated discussion about whether stuff should go in and shouldn't go in, and by very animated, there was about 300 comments on there, and after reading through it several times, I still couldn't come to any conclusion about where the vast majority of people stood on this issue, apart from anything else. It's really hard to pick out any
and I was so happy that I did not click submit on my Corba proposal for the standard library.
I think actually that one would be simple. I would be in favor of it, and everyone else in the world would not, and I'd be soundly overruled. No, I'm not a Corba fan, but I've often said that I think it got a rougher deal than it needed.
Yeah.
I'm always teased about that. I'm a pretty easygoing kind of live and let live guy, and as far as I can see, Corba, while far from perfect, has been reinvented by everybody and their dog in various forms ever since
Yes.
then, and none of them have been much better. So
Yeah, but the reality is, so it points at a problem with modularization. There's a few different things at play here when it comes to JSON and a JSON AST. One is we've been making proposals to improve collections and like fix up kind of broken aspects of it. So like the view proposal that I have put together. I think the only contentious part at it is, do we tackle all the collections or just views, right? But everyone acknowledges that there's limitations in the current implementation of views, and there's, what purpose are they serving, right? Is it always better to just use iterators? Well, right now, yes, but it shouldn't always be better to use iterators. There should be other idioms that are useful, and views should serve a purpose. So, like, you want to actually get rid of the cruft and replace it with something better. The JSON AST, you could view it as this because there is theoretically a JSON AST in that we can parse JSON into something that looks completely gross. It's a map of string any, I believe, where you have to pattern match on it, but that's the AST we have right now. And so this would be a wholesale improvement over that aspect of the standard library, which has sort of fell into decline and disrepair, yet people still use all the time because it's there.
yeah. Yeah,
So there's a whole bunch of nuance here, right? Like what's the right thing to do? Should we not try to improve the standard library and get the crufty JSON stuff out for something better?
I would say, one of the perspectives I have on this, of course, is Bill and I do the training all the time. I would say the number one question we get, at least about libraries, and we get a lot of questions about what library would you use for this. The number one is, what library should I use for JSON? And I don't have a great answer these days. It used to be Spray, but Spray hasn't changed a lot recently, and it's also using some things that are sort of deprecated, like, the auto-tupling, for example, and stuff like that. So people get a lot of warnings, and they don't know what they are now. And so you end up sort of saying, well, maybe Play is the way to go now for that. But there's not a clear answer. And that for all its evils, and believe me, I don't think it should be in there any more than the next person. The fact that XML is built in, you never get a question about that. People do XML. They use the built-in features, and it's tough. It's a really tough one. I think that's probably one of the things that is overlooked a lot. Is unless you are doing some kind of training or you're in contact with newcomers to Scala all the time, you lose that perspective as you become more experienced in Scala. It's natural to do it, right? You have a different view. I have a different view of the world than when I started out, but because I train people a lot, I get to see it through their eyes over again on a regular basis, and that helps me kind of stay connected with that, I think.
Someone in the Jitter room actually answered a question that I was about to ask, which is has anyone written a good write-up that compares all the pros and cons of the existing JSON libraries? And there is one that came out 6 days ago. Thank you, Thomas Bilt, for suggesting it. It's called a quick tour of JSON libraries in Scala. And I see that he's updated it in response to comments and stuff. I mean, it's not. I remember seeing this when it came out a few days ago. It's actually, it has examples of what all of the libraries look like. So little usage samples so you can compare the code. But it's not all that strong on conveying, like, what is the philosophy behind this library? What is the history of it, right? Which is important. Some of the libraries might be not so actively maintained anymore, but are still commonly seen just because they've been around so long. So this looks like a good start, but it's even, there's a lot to say that's not in this. It's a big topic.
Yeah.
Would be great if someone really tackled
dove into what
went even farther with this.
So it's funny you mentioned that. It's not JSON. It's SQL database, but I've literally just been through the same thing this week, where I'm attempting to convert a Rails-based application into something a bit more Scala-friendly. And I was, in particular, I've inherited a large database with lots and lots of connections, lots and lots of join tables, and stuff like that. And I was basically just working through libraries, trying to find the one I want to get this thing converted as quickly as possible. I don't really care exactly how much or how I do it, as long as it's a fast conversion and it runs fast at the end of it. Slick was actually slowing me down a lot because the table joins are pretty difficult in Slick, and you start getting some. I have to join 7 tables together at one point, and you start getting some pretty weird compiler errors when things go wrong. It's very hard to track down, so it became counterproductive. The one I ended up with was Scala-like JDBC, and the reason I got to that was I had to Google for the same sort of thing. Scala. I was looking for Scala JDBC lightweight wrappers, basically, and came across a great write-up that somebody had done. So maybe I'll stick that in the show notes. But I just sort of looked through that, and I'm like, yeah, this one looks like it's good, and it's had changes within the last month. That's another key that I sort of look for. Is it abandonware, or is it still active development? And all those kind of things go into that decision. So that took longer than I would have liked, just to try and pull out something that's going to work for getting data out of this database and sticking it back in again.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Josh said about how important it is to make sure that it's easy to get started, and I really think that this JSON library situation is embarrassing. It's not the language's fault, but Scala is more than just the language; it's the whole thing. And the situation is terrible. Like, something should be done. This is an example where just sort of letting anarchy happen in the community didn't work. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because there are definitely success stories in this area. Like the development of testing libraries was left up to the community, and out of that we got Scala Test, Specs2, and Scala Check, which is, so you have choices. All of them are good. It's not really redundant, and it happened all without having to have any standards guidance. So that's a success story. The replacement of actors in the standard library with Akka actors, I think that's another success story where it's like the standard library got the ball rolling. Someone in the community, at the time, Jonas was, there was no type safe, so Jonas was just this guy. The community came in, did something better, and it was so clearly superior that everyone used it. That's another success story. The JSON, this is a failure story, and it's an important central thing to have.
It really is,
such a massive fail on.
JSON is the de facto standard for data interchange, basically, between systems, between languages. It's really taken over from XML because, frankly, let's face it, it's a lot nicer to use than XML. Whether it's the right choice or not doesn't matter. It's the one people are using, so it needs good support.
Yeah, I mean, the part of the problem is that right now we're facing perfect as the enemy of good.
Yeah.
We can't make the library better because people want it to be perfect. And I don't think you're going to find a perfect JSON API because right now in the community, you don't just have one viable option. You have several, right? You have Suereth, you have Argonaut, you have PlayJSON, you have JSON for S. In SBT, we actually blended a few of these libraries together, like Pickling, JSON for S, and John. Because we picked each one for different reasons. John's like a really fast parser for it. JSON for S is an abstract AST that we thought everybody was sort of consolidating on, which I don't know if that's true. And we used Pickling because we actually don't care about the JSON itself. And manipulating it, we only care about turning it into protocol. So, but those are the various trade-offs that we had to make in that area. And all of those trade-offs exist, right? They're in all of those libraries, and all of them exist kind of with their own little bent on the JSON problem, because the JSON problem is too big to have a perfect solution. So, in my opinion, I do think that the standard library is embarrassing, and we should pick a library that has decent trade-offs to be in there. So when people go grab JSON, they don't grab one that has all of the flaws and none of the goodness. We should give them one that has at least something that it's good at, and then still have the ecosystem of healthy alternatives, because you need alternatives, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't solve that problem completely with one library right now. It's just not going to happen. And it's the same. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. So this discussion. There's a million things I want to say about this JSON discussion, right? So I'll pick one. There's something that I just don't quite get that maybe you guys can give me some insight into, which is I don't understand the defensive reaction to providing something which is a default. The reaction seems to be like, well, if you do that, you're hurting the community, you're hurting alternatives, you're hurting third-party development, you're going to shut everything else down. I just don't get it. Like, it just doesn't seem true at all to me, and so I feel like I must be missing something.
No, I think so. Recently, yeah, I don't know if you guys read the post about the free error monad and how Haskell's been going crazy about it. The free error monad. It's freer than free beer. Yeah. So it's like you already drank the beer and you didn't even know it.
Yeah,
That's
that article by Oleg is fascinating. So I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone should read it. Anyway, I implemented a naive version of the free monad in Scala, and you can actually implement a small AST and interpreter with the free monad in like 50 lines of code, and have nothing here has monad in it whatsoever, and then here you're just focused on interpreting the things that have been lifted. There's a ton of power in that, huge amounts of power. However, I'm going to throw this out there. Like, in Scala right now, I'd say there are 3 different ways to write code. There's I still write Java. There's the more the version of Scala espoused by the standard library, which I think is more the canonical way of doing it. And then there's more purely functional programming. And I think each have merits for various scenarios. I personally kind of want a different standard library for purely functional Scala programming. I don't actually want to blend this style in at all, because it actually hurts this style over here if you have things mixed, right? You actually can't make all the same assumptions you can over here. But I want this to exist, and I want the idiomatic one to exist, depending on what I'm doing. There's times where I really want the super functional stuff, and there's times where I need to get dirty and do this side, like when I'm writing the interpreter. So kind of blending these two things together is nice, in my opinion. So I'd actually prefer to see 2 standards of like here is the lazy functional programming standard, here is the eager ML-ish standard library, and that'd be beautiful to me if we could actually manage to accomplish that. What I think the problem is, people who are want to build the purely functional thing, if you have this impure, like a standard library that has more eager evaluations and some impurities, it can actually hurt your selling case of this style, because there are things that happen here that will negate points over here. And so I think that's kind of the core of this issue.
What's an example of that?
That's a good question. So why do you ask for examples, man? I
can give you some time to think about that, because I want to jump back to Seth's earlier point. I'm not sure I even have a conclusion. I've been sort of working through this, but the story bears telling anyway, I think, which is so the best example I can think of that happening is probably Play with Specs. Very early on, Play decided that Specs was going to be the blessed testing framework within it. and I think it still is. I think it actually comes with specs embedded. And I know that Bill was a bit chagrined by the whole idea that they had chosen a favorite, because he's put a lot of work in Scala test. But he really turned around and made Scala test support for Play really, really good. And now it's very, very simple to put Scala test in. It has feature parity for all of the kind of testing, because the test integration is really where you care about this stuff. Being able to, for example, inject the fake application context in Play so that you can run your tests as though there's an application running, and the various things like testing the routing, for example. All of those test integrations, they're now there. They work just the same, and I think the result is Play still does choose specs, I think, as its favorite, but it's trivial to add the other one. So it didn't really hurt in that case. I think that's probably the conclusion that I came to. However, I saw that it was not the best thing Bill could have read. He put a lot of work into that. So that you have to consider the people factor, and when you choose a favorite, that kind of means that you're dissing all the others, even if gently. And I think that's probably where some of this comes from, is whenever you say we're going to use this one, it means that there's some kind of inherent or implicit blessing that the others haven't got suddenly. What they do with that is up to the library author. Do you give up and take your toys and go and play elsewhere, or do you say, hey, I think this is better, and I'm going to put my principles on the line and make it as good, if not better, than the option there, and get people to use it that way.
So in terms of examples how some things can hurt, I also have that as well. But yeah, so like collections are a decent example. There are operations in collections which theoretically should be lazy but actually force behavior, right? And so what you end up with, say, in cats, is people will lift these operations into some other abstraction that they build on top of, or they might even re-implement it to have it have the semantics that they want for their library, because there's a different expectation of semantics on one side versus the other.
Actually, isn't there a great example in maps, I'm trying to remember which way around it is, where operations that you do on keys are eager, but operations that you do on the values are lazy? So there's like a real mix in that particular case. The lack of consistency there hurts you, because you're expecting it to be one way and it's the other, but it's not consistent across even both operations, basically.
Right. And part of that is, I think, like, I do want a library that is based on eager evaluation. I think that's really valuable. I think especially on the JVM, where that's how it executes, that's valuable. I also want a library that's based on lazy evaluation, which is why I think, like, having the two, you could even have it in the same standard library, but it'd be two areas. But, like, you need both of these things, in my opinion, so on the JVM. I think it's important.
I guess I can maybe partly answer my own question by saying that I should remind myself that people's memories are long. So I tend to judge what TypeSafe and Martin and EPFL are doing by our current intentions, right? But there's a lot of, you can look back at the history of the standard library. There's a lot of junk in there that got in really early, and I think, every time this comes up, all of us try to explain, like, look, those were different times, but a lot of that stuff is actually still there, right? There have been other mistakes, things that look like mistakes now. I'm not, second guessing past decisions, but stuff like bundling parallel collections into the collections hierarchy, stuff like views, also not being separate. And those mistakes actually haven't been corrected yet. So I tend to say it's like, hey, give us a break. Like, we realize these were mistakes. We're doing stuff about it now. And I point at things like the modularization that happened in Scala 2.11 of breaking XML and parser combinators out, and I say, hey, we're moving in the right direction. But some of these past decisions are still with us. We're still dealing with the consequences of them. So maybe I should sort of remind myself that people are. I can't expect everyone to be as charitable just because we're saying it's like, oh, we know better now.
Well, we're not alone in that. And in fact, I think we have it better than a lot of, or some of the other options out there. Look at Java, for example, with AWS List and Vector 1.1 still in the code base. And those will never get pulled out, man. If they were ever going to get pulled out, it would have happened by now. I can't see that happening. So yeah, we've got that problem, but other languages have it too.
Well, I'm going to throw something else out there. When you look at other...
Sorry, not AWS List. What was it? I got that wrong. What's the crap? AWT List. Sorry. Abstract Widget Toolkit. That's the one I was trying to say. I've been using AWS too much recently. Anyway, sorry, Josh.
One thing that so a lot of languages have like default module systems and like easy discoverability that they built within the community. Java, on the other hand, had a giant standard library and then chaos in the module system, which became Maven, which I would argue is both a boon and our biggest enemy in terms of modularization and finding libraries. It makes it easy to download a library, and it makes it really hard to find anything useful about that library before you download it, right? It's just arbitrary coordinates and like a server and all that kind of crap, as opposed to like CPAN or Hackage or whatever. So I think that was kind of a detriment on the Java side, but when it comes to fixing a standard library and fixing mistakes you've made, Java did not set us a good precedent. And to help with that, they have decided to implement a module system that has taken how many years? 6, 7 years?
Yeah, well, yeah.
And there was through pain.
There's a few extenuating events in there, like Sun going out of business and stuff like that. But yeah, agreed.
Right.
It's taken longer than it should.
It's been a long time coming. They've had prototypes for a while, and they're still working on how to like get Corba out of there so that you don't need Corba at runtime. Yeah, I don't know why I pick on Corba. I actually like Corba.
Everyone picks on Corba.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's plenty of craft in there to remove, and it still needs to happen. Maybe the module system will let it, but it's tough.
But from a practical standpoint, it's actually hard to remove things on the JVM. It's hard to do this. It's hard to keep the compatibility you want and actually change stuff because the way the platform works.
Yeah. This is, I think I've said this before on the podcast, but I think that we get a kind of perverse benefit in Scala of the fact that we break binary compatibility in every major release, which is that all of the old libraries, the ones that aren't maintained anymore, is just that we sort of flush them out of the ecosystem. And if this seems like, there's upgrading your project is hard, replacing a dead library that's no longer maintained, you have to find a new one is hard, but I actually think that this is better pain than the just like nothing can ever be removed pain.
Yeah, agreed. I think Scala has this better than Java does, definitely, because Java never removes anything. I look to Python as sort of a role model in this area. They seem to have done... Yeah, and the funny thing was, it certainly wasn't my take, but I've had several people say recently that Python 3000 was a disaster. Have you guys heard that opinion before?
Yeah.
In what way? It seemed like it's a big change, but it was a reasonably smooth transition as far as I can tell. I wasn't in the middle of the community.
No. Early on, it was not a smooth transition. It became a smooth transition by necessity. Like, we could learn a hell of a lot from Python 3. But they figured out how to make it a smooth transition. But it was yeah.
I chose that time to sort of duck out of the Python community and join the Scala one. And only recently have I started picking up Python again to work on Enzyme Sublime.
Yeah, I still hear stories of people who don't support Python 3.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
They've chosen to not upgrade to it, but they maintain the library.
One of the things we did when we changed the or when we revived the Enzyme Sublime stuff, was sort of ported it to Python 3 and Sublime Text 3, and there was a few things to change, but it wasn't that hard. And I thought it was all smooth. I was obviously I had that lucky that lucky accident of being out of the line of fire when all the bad stuff was going down, and then just swanned back in at the end of it. And I'm like, yeah, this is great, awesome.
Well, actually, it's a good point. So like deprecating things and providing migration paths is huge. I don't know if you guys know this, but the actors library, when it was deprecated, there were two guys at EPFL, or two people at EPFL, that worked on this actors migration library, which basically tried to give you a library you can inject into your code, you can take your Scala actors code and it would make it feel more like akka, and then you could throw akka in, and they had a whole guide for how to transition. How many times do you see this? Python 3, to get fully like pushed over, had to create like a huge amount of migration code. They added code into Python 2 that would tell you how to do Python 3 things. They had import future.
Yeah, I like import future. I like that.
Yeah, they had
in
all sorts
the
of things.
In the Gitterum, Thomas Bilk is pointing out that the Python people have it harder than we do because they don't have a type system
This is true.
to tell you when something's broken.
Yeah, that's quite true. He was asking earlier, shouldn't it be easier for a static language like Scala to remove stuff? I think the answer there is it's easier to detect when stuff is broken, for sure. That doesn't fix the problem that people have to go in and fix all their code still. It's easier, it's not easy.
So one of my friends in Pittsburgh, Franklin, he had this idea where every time you needed to change code, you would actually write a macro AST transformation that would migrate users' code. When you had to write a deprecation annotation, it would include a macro that would rewrite code to move to the new version, and that was the only way you could alter code after you've written it.
There's no new ideas under the sun. I think what's his name? James Gosling had that idea with something called Jackpot many years ago. His idea, Jackpot. I think was it Jackpot? I think it was Jackpot. Oh, Crackerjack. It was one or the other. And the idea was it was a kind of abstract syntax tree level of refactoring support in the JVM, and you could use that to provide what you're talking about. Basically, it was like macros, but basically you could change stuff and have automatic fixes provided by this compiler-supported refactoring library. And the refactoring would only work if it compiled before and after. That was kind of the idea behind this. It was a great idea. I don't know what happened to it. Died when Sun did, I think. But
well, I think the practical nature of it, it's actually really hard to pull off because it severely limits the kinds of things you can change in code.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to it, the point is, when it comes to things like a standard library and maintaining a standard library and improving it, same with the language and doing any sort of change on that, the migration tools, the tooling around like upgrading code, you need to spend more time on that than the feature. And I would argue you need to spend about 3 to 4 times as much on the migration as you do on the feature itself.
Yeah.
Generally. And this is something that we just don't do that often as software developers. We don't think about the cost of change and getting people upgraded and that, but that's where you spend all your time.
So actually, it's quite nice. What you said was insightful. I'm going to mark it +1 for insightful, Josh. Because if you look at it then, we kind of have the extremes that we want to avoid, right? We don't want to be Java. We don't want backwards compatibility at all costs and still be supporting vector from like 0.9 of Java in the code. And it sounds like we don't want to do the arbitrary cut everything over to Python 3000 move. So we have to navigate somewhere in the middle of that. It's nice to know those bounds, I think, ahead of time, if nothing else.
Yeah.
I'm just checking what people are saying. None put a checkbox in there.
Snake, it looks like.
Eric, I'm not quite sure what he's doing, but
Eric, is that a don't tread on me flag?
Yeah, is that a don't go there sign? Go back, turn back, wrong way.
Or is it supposed to be a Python? I don't know.
That's abstract comment of the day. So. Anyway, that was distracting. Where did we get to? in our.
So
have we meandered anywhere
have we
vaguely
meandered
useful
to a
in this?
conclusion? My conclusion is let's do a recap, each of you. What would you like to see out of the standard library?
Oh,
Just
go
a
ahead.
one sentence recap, or two sentences, or paragraph, but no papers, just a paragraph.
I would like to see a smaller standard library and a larger set of standard modules.
So you did more than one, so I'm going to do more than one as well because I can't keep it to one either. I've got the quick answer, which is I'd like to see a resource because I work with beginners all the time. I'd like to see a resource where people can go and find high quality. They know a trusted source where they can go and find high quality libraries, possibly with reviews and information on what they need. Because I don't have all these answers when they ask them either. I think I'd like to see. Two other things for experienced engineers, and these are much more woolly, fuzzy ones. But experienced engineers to remember that newcomers are the lifeblood of a language, and we really need to consider them when we make these big proclamations about what should and shouldn't be in. And I think the other one, which is even fuzzier and warmer, is try and remember that everybody's trying to do the right thing and give them the benefit of the doubt when you engage in conversations with them. I don't think anyone here is deliberately going out to ruin your day, so try not to think that when you're dealing with them. Okay, that's me. What do you think, Josh? Hello, Josh? Josh has frozen. He's gone into a compile loop. He's gone into an infinite compile loop here.
Control C, Control C.
Yeah. Abort. Pull up.
Wait! Before you abort it, let's get a thread dump.
I was going to say, what is the quote? She's gone rogue, Captain. I have to take her out. Oh, he's disappeared. What should we say about Josh while he's not here? We could make up something for him. Josh, I think we should elect Josh president of the Scala libraries, and anything he says goes.
Sure, and also everything is his fault. If there's
that's also with great power comes great responsibility. Yes. We'll give him a minute or two to show up. Anything else that you want to talk about, Seth? What else can we?
Well, I'm glad that I just want to second what Josh and what both of you were saying about that we need better ways for people to find and I shouldn't say install, but to get libraries into their REPL or into their project in their IDE or whatever. There's a huge amount of room for us to do better on that. And if we did do better on that, then hopefully that would help with some of the tension. Partly because if libraries were easier to find and use, there would be less pressure to have more standard things, right? I mean, because this is the hammer we have right now of making something easy, is throwing it making it standard. So we wouldn't be tempted to use that hammer as often if libraries were easier to find. And then also the third-party libraries would be easier for everyone to find, and that would just benefit everything and everyone.
I'm going to float an idea that I've just sort of breezed on that I don't know if it's a good one or not. And probably it's a terrible idea, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway and get it in people's heads. In Ubuntu Linux, there are what they call the Ubuntu packages, which are sort of recommended meta packages that are an umbrella for all sorts of other things. And if you click on them, basically the packages themselves are empty, but they list a bunch of dependencies underneath them that are brought in. So there's things, an example is Linux Standard Space, LSB. When you enable that, it brings in a bunch of standard tools that you kind of expect to be there. If you're a command line jockey, you kind of expect all these things to be there, and there's various other ones. throw out the idea of like meta packages. So you have an EPFL meta package that says, here's a bunch of recommended libraries, blah, blah, blah. And you sort of can then just add the one enabler in SBT or whatever, and it brings down the core of that. Likewise, I could imagine type level having something like that, and so on. So as an idea, discuss. I don't know that I like it yet. Because what it will do is cause a lot more internet traffic, of course. But then again, anyone using SBT is already experiencing tons of that. Have you tried wiping out your Ivy cache and then typing SBT build again or SBT compile again recently? Because it takes a while in most projects.
Oh yes, yeah.
And believe it or not, I wipe out my Ivy cache probably about once every couple of months because, you know, Ivy just leaves itself dirty sometimes. Sometimes you need to do that, and it's easier to blow the whole thing away than try and track down what particular thing has broken.
Yeah, I've tried to. I have a little. I try not to RM-RF it anymore, which I used to do. It's just too painful. So I try and move it aside. And work for a while, and then see if that clears it up. And if that doesn't clear it up, then I go back to the old one, so I don't lose my last 3 months of download.
Yeah, that's smart. Man, we lost Josh.
Yeah, he says he's got no internet.
No. Oh well. Maybe it's time to call a kindly close on it. Unless there's anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, this is like this cursed episode. One of us is likely to suddenly like an arrow, land in our shoulder.
Oh, my back.
To be like that Werner Herzog movie where someone shot him while he was being interviewed.
The attrition rate was high. We were supposed to have, originally, we were all hopeful that we would have all 5 of us here for this one, and then Daniel dropped out, and then Heather was going to show up, and I think something happened there, and now we lost Josh. So yeah. I think maybe the gods are trying to tell us something. I think maybe it's time to call it a day. Was there anything else on, just one more